show how we are actually connecting the backend, that is the application which is having an API using ExpressJS, and the same API we are going to use on our front end, which is developed using the React framework, which is NextJS. So we'll show how we are creating the API and we are passing the data through an API, and that API is being consumed by the front end, and the one that we are seeing on our screen now, this is basically our front end. Okay, so here we are actually creating two separate API, one API which is getting this data and another API which is getting this data. Okay, and we are combining both the data and showing that on our UI. So let's see how the code looks like. So if you go into our Visual Studio, we can see here that in our main project folder we have two separate folders. One is client, one is server. So server is the folder where we are keeping all our ExpressJS related code, and the client is the folder where we are keeping all our NextJS related code. Okay, so these are the dependencies that we have to install or packages using npm. So first we have installed Express, which is on the server side. That is, if we go to our server, and that's how we install, right? So npm I, if you are needing whatever the packages we need to install, we are installing using npm I, or in that case we are installing only the Express. Since I already have installed, I'm not showing it. Nodemon we are going to use for our development purpose. Course we are using for cross origin, because this API will be consumed by the front end, right? So that's why we need to use course. And .env, which we are using to create some env folder or env file, basically to keep all our environmental related information which can be used. Okay, now if we see our server, okay, so server.js, I have kept it pretty simple. Okay, and it is the main purpose is just to create two APIs. So that's how we have created two APIs here. Okay, here, like, we can use express.router. I mean, we can use express routing, we can use the controllers, we can connect the controllers with the models. So that we'll see little later, but now the main demonstration is on how to create the API here simply. Okay, and the data that we are sending from the API, okay, this data, whichever you are sending, this is from the home. So here you can see that this is our Express, which you can say that it is pointing to listening to 3001. And here also on our server we have kept our port on 3001, right? So this is under the server folder under env, we have kept the 3001, and on the server we are using as a .env, and we are using that as a process.env.port. So that's how we are showing that it is actually pointing to 3001. Now if you see our first API, which is actually API/v1, okay, so there is a root one, so we are keeping that, and it is getting this message, whichever the message that we are sending, right, which you are sending. I'm sure here I have not used any kind of port or anything. This is simply just to show how the API has been created and that API has been consumed. So here we have created two different API. One is /API/v1, another one is /API/v1/users, and we have created some manual user like Jack, Paul, and Mr. Smith, and these are the two APIs that needs to be consumed on our client, which is the next API, which is the Next.js, and using Axios we are going to call that API on our front end, and we are going to display that on our UI. So let's see how the client actually looks like. Okay, so this is how the client is. So he can see here it is listening on port 3000, and now if I open my client, okay, and if I show you the package.json, this is actually running on Next, which is on 14 version, and we are using these are the scripts: dev, build, start, and lead. So basically we are just using the dev part because we're on the development environment. Now let's go into the routing. So it is, as usual, it is under the app folder, and since it is 14 version of the Next, so everything is under the page.js, which is actually basically the router. So in future, if you want to create some other routing, other folder, say for an example here I want to go to /about, or I want to go to /service, so it should take me to that particular about. So what we'll do in that case we have to basically come here, and we have to create a folder called about, and inside the about we have to create a file called page.js. This file has to be page.js. For an example, you have created, and let's create some dummy data to show that how we can actually navigate between the page to page, right? So here, let me write something here, since it is our product. So this is our about, so we'll write that this says about page, and if we save it, and now if we go here on our URL about, we can say that it is showing this page is our about page. So whatever thing we are writing inside the folder, inside the page, that is what it is being automatically, it is creating the routing. Here we don't have any separate concept of React router DOM, we have to install separately because the Next.js handles it automatically for us. So that's how the routing. Anyways, this demonstration is not about how we are creating the routing. So let me delete that so that we should not deviate from our main objective. Here the objective is pretty simple. We are going to go to our home page and calling those APIs. So now how we are calling those APIs? So first of all, we cannot use any of the React state modules if we are not making that as a use client, because Next.js by default it is always a server rendering, right? So to use any of the React's hook, we have to make it as a client by writing use client on the top of the page or on the component, and then we can use any of the React hooks. Okay, so here we are using the React's default hook use effect, basically to handling this life cycle of our component, and after that use state to maintain the state or data. So here we are creating two states. So first of all, as you see here on our server side, let me just let's see if we can make it split right. Okay, so on the split right, on the right side, I'll try to open server.js from the server. Okay, and here you can see, let me close this one so you can get more space to look into it. Here you can see the first one is /v1, right, and the second API is /1. So what I'm doing, so this is our base URL, right? So /API/v1 is the base because this is the common. So what I have done, I have gone to my router and I have created a .env. Okay, okay, and you can see on the .env I have kept that as the base URL. So I made his next public API base URL. You know that I kept the name very long. We can keep a simple base URL, but we have kept it this way. So this is the basic, which is API 3000, which is the base URL of our API. And since the API is coming from the Express, so you have to give the Express port number. Now let me get back to the server again. And now if we come to our page.js on our client, so I'm always doing this mistake. Okay, let it be here. Okay, in the left side it is our page.js. So here we can see that we are importing these two hooks, and after that we are calling the Axios. I mean, basically importing the Axios, and after that we are declaring the base URL here, right? So we are saying the base URL about this one, the one that we have actually kept it on our .env, and after that we are default getting into the home basically, and after that all the data manipulation, everything happens just after that. And after the return statement, everything is whatever we are seeing on our UI. So whatever you see on the UI, that will be whatever thing is inside this return, right? So above the return, it is all about the data manipulation. So that's what the data will be going to show on the UI. So all the data has to be processed on this section. So here we can see that we have created two different user the state management using the message, and one is for the users. And to setting that up, I mean, like we are creating the function as set message or set users. So basically this is the one which is coming for the first API, that is for this one, the message, and the second is for the user. So we have kept it under the same thing. And I'll show you one thing. See, let me close this. Okay, so this is how we have to do. So it is like, you know, any API that we are calling, and if that API needs to be rendered automatically every time the page loads, we have to use use effect. And since use effect has a side effect, so basically in the use effect, if you are not giving this dependency array, what happens any time any changes happens to the data, it automatically renders. So renders means it kills the page and again refresh the page again from the beginning, which you don't want because that can be a performance issue. So you're making it responsible and restricted using this empty dependency array. Okay, so here we are using the use effect, which is for our data, and we are using the base URL here. So this is our base URL. So what we are doing, we're using the Axios, and since here use effect needs a callback function, so see, this is the first part of the use effect, and the second part of the use effect is always the dependency. So in the first part we are actually calling our callback function. So at the callback function we are let me delete this so we make it more simpler. So we are calling the fetch data because this is going to be a promise, so we have to use async and await, and to use the await we have to create an async function. So we are creating async function named as fetch data, and we are giving that function as async. And this function is again we don't need to use try and catch, but it is a best practice to handle any errors, because sometimes when we are using some promises we really never know what kind of errors we may get. Sometimes the database connectivity may be lost or something, because here we are not using database, but still it is best practice where we are using async and await we have to use try and catch. So that's the way we can handle the errors very gracefully. Okay, so once you go for async and await, so once you inside the try block, we are actually doing all our manipulation of data. So we are calling the Axios here, okay, and getting all the data and putting everything inside the response. Okay, and response is actually bringing all the objects of data, and that data is actually, if you want to get the data from the object, we have to use dot data. So data contains an object, right? So the response contains an object, and the object has key and value, and the key here is the data and the value is the value that is being sent by the API. So what we are doing, we are using the response dot properties of the object, that is data, to get the information, and whatever the information that you're getting, it has to go get into the set message, so that it automatically replaces this. Okay, please note we are not using like this here. If we do that, so what will happen, it actually show the loading and the data, but we don't want that. We want to replace the loading. So if data is not there, it should show the loading. Okay, so we are not spreading anything here, and if nothing comes, just it go into the error. So after that, after this function is being created, we have to call the function, right? Or else, like in use effect, would not know what to do. So we are calling the function, and after the loading. So similar to that, for the next function, next API, also we are creating another use effect. So here also you can see that because the base URL is up to this /v1, but /users we have to use like this, right? And after that we are using the same fetch data. We can give some other name, but we can keep the same name. That's not a problem because it is inside a different block. Right, so that's how it works on the ES6. So if it is a different block, it doesn't matter, right? It is a totally different entity. So fetch data we are using here, also fetch data, it doesn't matter because it's a different entity, and you're doing basically the same one. User API is this one. So the entire API is coming into this. So actually it is a localhost /3001 /API /v1 /user is the user API. That API we are calling, that's why you're using axios.get, because you're calling, so you're using .get method. If we are posting something, like we'll be using axios.post for sending the data to the server. To getting the data from the server, we have to use get method. Now as usual, after that, whatever the data we get on the response again brings an object, and that object as a data as a key, and the value will be the value. So here we are using the data, so it brings all the data inside the set user, and the data we are getting here is actually an array. So we are putting that here also an empty array. So initially it is empty because nothing is there, and once we are setting it up, calling the API, it pushes all the data inside this array. And after that, since it is an array, so we have to do something called mapping, right? So to get the data, so that's what we are doing, users, which is actually this variable. So all my users are getting inside this variable. So this variable, which is actually an array, that's so you can map on that, and we are keeping some names. So each and every, so this is the first element, the second element, and this is my third element. That's why we are saying as LM here. You can say any name here, it doesn't matter, but in that case I'm just keeping as lm. Maybe you can keep the name as people, right, or anything people. So if you're changing the name people here, you have to change the name here people. Okay, so people, so all the people, it will go inside. So here the first people will be checked, then it will run this h1 once, then again second time again go to the people, then again it will run twice, so 3 times it will run. So every time it will go people, the jack will go inside this people as a variable, and inside this variable, and here this variable we are displaying. So every time, so because it is 3 time mapping, so it will create 3 separate users. Okay, and this is how actually we are creating an API on the Express, and we are accessing the API into our front end, which can be NextJS or similar to that. We are using for even for the React also do the same thing, but only difference between the NextJS and the React is in the NextJS we have to use client, since the NextJS by default is a server component. Okay, so this is the only thing that we have to keep in mind. Apart from that, most of the things are same. And yes, one more thing, here you can see that I have used use effect once, use effect twice, which is actually not at all a best practice, and this is not recommended. Why? Because it is performance optimized, it is not performance optimized and all those things, right? So in that case, what we have to do, we have to use single use effect, and we have to use promise all. Now I have kept this 2 use effect. There is a reason, so that it would be easy for us to understand on what situation we have to use promise.all. Okay, so promise.all basically does the same thing. So let me just comment this guy. Okay, so here you can see without commenting before how it looks, all the data that is coming from the database, it is showing here, right? First the message that you have sent, and the second, and this is coming from API/API/v1, and this is coming from /API/v1/user, right? So let me write it, that will be much better, I guess. Okay, so I'm NextJS coming from coming from /API/v1 endpoint, and this one list of users, it is coming from /API/v1/users, right? So it will be easy for us to understand. Okay, now if I refresh it, it shows that it is coming from this API, this is coming from this API. Now that part is fine, but how we can optimize that? So it is not good practice to use 2 use effects, and this is not good practice to use 2 times Axios. Okay, I'll get that in my next video, but here I'm just trying to explain about the how we can create an API, how we can consume the API, and how we can make the code more optimized by using promise all whenever there are 2 different kinds of use effects. So let me just uncheck that and comment this back out. Okay, so here you can see that it doesn't have any impact, it's the same thing, but only thing, the code became much optimized. Now what happened here is, up to this everything is fine. So what we have done, we have created 2 APIs. So in the future, if I want to go for another API also, I can do that. So if I want to create for one more, for an example, anything, app.get./user API user.user data or something, anything if I create here, I just need to come here and input that as a const, and after that I have to put that in the promise.all. So promise.all again needs 2 APIs, and the same variables are getting called here with the data. Okay, this is pretty easy, which you can actually easy to understand. Okay, so that is one of the reasons why you use promise.all instead of writing this, calling those promises individually, right? So it's a good thing. Okay, so I hope this demonstrates how we create API, and how we consume the API, and how we can use the Axios and use effect to show that on our UI. Thank you. And if this is helpful, right, we can make more such videos where you can explain the best practices. Thank you.